Oh, oh my goodness, man. Hey guys, thank you for that. Oh my goodness. All right, so make sure somebody can leave a comment and then say like when the podcast actually starts, so then anybody else that watches this later they know exactly where the voice comes in. So, anyways, I'm gonna start this over, man. I can't believe that happened. So, anyways, in this in this tutorial, I'm gonna teach you how to pass the React Native technical exam. This is going to be a technical exam for a senior level one software developer. Senior level two is I'll tell you about the steps about senior one through two through three. When you're trying to get a position at a senior level three, you can expect to get paid anywhere from 150K to higher. Um, when you have that technical exam, they expect you to not only know React Native, they expect you to know Redux, they expect you to know how to create slices, and they also expect you to understand mobile development architecture. And they expect you also to lead and to manage developers underneath you to help make sure that the application is built in the correct form and also built correctly for its foreseeable future. When you're working as a level two software developer, they expect you to already know React Native. They don't expect you to know everything, but they expect you to feel comfortable debugging an application, knowing how to read code, and knowing how to create new features for that application. Level one is when you can expect to get a roughly around 60K to 80K. Now, me personally, when I started off with 75K. And then because companies do give raises yearly, it went up to about 80K. So I would tell you, because we're working remotely as software developers, if you're living in Kansas or somewhere where the market is really small, you can get a position for a company in New York, California, Florida, Colorado, Texas. Those are really the hot points in Minneapolis. And you can get paid, I want to say about 80K or higher as a beginning software developer. Also, there's a lot of contractors looking for React Native developers right now. So there's always opportunity. Just make sure that you set up your LinkedIn, and it's easy for them to find you. I'm gonna take a look at my sound settings real fast. I'll make sure it's coming out of where I want it to be coming out of. Okay, so now it's coming out of my speaker. Hey guys, so sorry about that. I'm glad that you actually corrected me. So, anyways, yeah, so let's get into it. I'm going to share my screen. Now, forgive me, I'm a little bit under the weather. So right now I have a clean React Native project. Now, the first thing I'm going to do when we're actually starting your application, I mean, when you're starting your technical exam for React Native, they're going to give you an endpoint. Now, with that endpoint, they expect you to know how to get the data from that endpoint to show on your application. If I go back to the web browser, I have a endpoint right here. You can see that it shows in the payload, it shows a collection of all the data that's coming through. It's an array that returns the title and the body. So the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to install Axios into the application. This is exactly the step that you're going to do when you have your technical interview. They don't expect you to know everything. They just expect you, they want to get an idea how your workflow is. So you're going to tell them, hey, okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is, and you're going to vocalize it, speak while you have your technical exam. The first thing I'm going to do is install Axios into my application. The way you do that is you open up your terminal, run the command yarn add Axios, or you can run npm install Axios. I prefer to use yarn. Once yarn is installed into your application, just to check, you never know with these dependencies, sometimes that there's some additional setup on the pod side. So I'm gonna go into my iOS directory and I'm just gonna run pod install. Okay, so I'm gonna go to the React Native installation side. I'm pretty sure this is a bundle issue. Follow along. These types of things do happen during technical interviews. I've interviewed plenty of developers, and a lot of them, the main thing you want to do is you want to relax during interview and you want to get a flow, because when you're working as a software developer, problems happen. So the thing I'm going to go ahead and do, if you take a look at React Native's documentation, there's some issues with the M1 chip and the pods. The way you resolve that is just run bundle install. As you can see, it's installing all of our dependencies, and then also bundle execute pod install. I'm going to copy this command. Now, while this is actually building, I'm going to go ahead and see if I have any questions. So first off, I want to say thank you to everybody that left a comment, man. I see that there's a few of them saying that my voice is muted. I appreciate it. So while this is building, I'm going to give you the download on how the actual React Native interview actually goes. So when you first have your first interview for React Native position, you're going to have an interview with somebody that's not technical. It's going to be non-technical, and they're going to ask you about your history as a software developer or your history as a React Native developer. You're going to tell them how many years of experience you have, and they're going to tell you what things, they're going to ask you, what things have you done for your software development career. So you're going to tell them all the projects you worked on, all the companies you worked with, all the things that you did that were unique within the application. And they're going to say, okay, for example, I built the localization for the current company that I'm working with. They're going to ask you, okay, what issues did you run into when you built the localization feature? And I can tell them, I will know because I built it. And this is very important. This is because this is how they see if you actually know what you're talking about. I'm going to ask them, what issues did I run into? I'm going to tell them when I use the React Native Device Info package. The React Native Device Info package, the payload for Android is different from the payload for iOS. So when I set up functionality for localization, I had to create functionality to handle iOS and to handle Android. And to handle those, and basically I had to mutate those properties to make sure that they display correctly on both Android and the iOS directory. Another thing they're going to ask, is there anything else within that? When you're localizing an application, you have to get the strings from a JSON file. So we store our JSON files in a remote repo where we can actually call that repo within our application using our node packages. So you want to do something like that. They're going to ask you about the things that you've done for the company, what you built, and then what issues you ran into. They're also going to ask you what areas you feel like you can improve on. Now, next, after you went past that, the next interview is the technical interview, which is what I'm going to run you through. Now, during the technical interview, there's not a lot of talking. They just expect you, the company, typically what happens is sometimes they'll contact you a day or so in advance to make sure that the application is up and running on your system. I've interviewed developers where during the interview, they never even built the application on their system, and they never even configured their system to use React Native. Now, the reason that you don't use there's tools like CodePen or something like that. CodePen works for React. It does not work for React Native. So these companies, they'll build a package, they'll build a repo, they'll build a testing assessment repo for the React Native interview. And your biggest goal, the biggest thing you want to do is make sure that you install that as soon as possible, get it up and running on your system so that you're ready and up and ready to go. Now let me check if everything is actually installed here. Okay, so everything's installed. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to restart the application. All right, just to make sure everything's up and running. And it looks like we already have a question by Luca. Luca, I'm new to your channel. What do you say about new architecture? I'm not too sure what do you mean by new architecture. Luca, can you be more specific about what you mean around new architecture? Are you saying the new React Native architecture or mobile development architecture in general? Okay, so the application's up and running again. I'm going to share my screen. Now, once again, the only reason I'm doing this technical walkthrough is because in last week's live session, someone asked me a question: how do you pass a React Native technical interview? And I walked them through it briefly at the end of last week's live. So in this week, the whole goal is to help you pass the React Native interview. You just want to remain calm. So as I stated, the first thing you want to do is to actually get your endpoint data to show on the screen. So I'm gonna make sure my banner. Yes, okay, everything's looking good. So the first thing you want to do is when they give you an endpoint, I want you to take that endpoint. They're going to give you a technical document. It's going to have an endpoint. I want you to grab that endpoint and paste it into your URL, just like I did. The reason you're doing that is you want to make sure that the endpoint works correctly. You want to get an idea of what the payload actually looks like. Everything you see on the screen is a payload. Now, since we know that the data is showing, we have to get this data on the application. So I'm gonna go into my pods because for whatever reason, with the new React Native installation, the pods they have Hermes enabled as true. I want Hermes to be false. Now with Hermes, when I set Hermes as false, this is going to allow me to use the debugger in the way that I want to use the debugger. So let me go ahead and run this. I'm going to have to run bundle update. And this is going to crash the application, but oh well. You see right here, it shows that Hermes was removed. So I'm removing Hermes, and this is going to allow me to use the React Native debugger. Let me make sure I clean my cache. Now I start cache clean. Okay, and I'm going to refresh our project just to make sure everything looks good. Okay, cool. All right, so right now what I'm going to go ahead and do, I'm going to run Command D, and I'm going to open debugger. It's saying it's missing my protocol. The Hermes thing is not running. Let me go ahead and fix this because this shouldn't be doing this. I'm going to go ahead and just close this application. Run my yarn clash clean again. So our bundle, this should be clean. This is already removed. So I'm gonna go ahead and run install. Now, anyways, while this is building again, I'm just gonna open Xcode. Okay, and I'm gonna clean this project. Clean my build, and I'm gonna run it. So anyways, while that's building, I'm actually gonna start coding our app. So right here in our app.js, so we have to wait for this to build. I hope this doesn't take too long. So right now in our app.js, what I'm gonna go ahead and do is I'm going to clean this. I'm going to clean out everything that I have here. Select all, remove. I'm going to give us a clean app component. So typically when you first get your, the first thing you'll see on your technical exam, they're going to give you an empty component. And what you want to go ahead and do is you're going to use your hooks. So the two main hooks that you're going to get familiar with that you need to know and they expect you to know is your use state and your use effect. Use state allows you to make your default state value for your property and also gives you a function to update that property. Use effect is something that handles data that gets called before your component actually loads. So I'm going to bring in use state and use effect. Right now, I'm going to create my variable, which is going to be called data. And I'm going to create my function called set data. Set data is going to be equal to use state, and the default value of use state is going to be an empty array. Okay, and as you can see, our application is up and running, and app is right here in the corner. So I'm going to add, just for this, I'm going to add my safe area view, just so you can see it. I'll replace this view with safe area view. Now what is it? Okay, so now you can see that app right there. Now, the next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is my use effect. So I'm going to say use effect. And at the end of your use effect, you always have to add your dependency array. This is anything that your hook is dependent on, any kind of data that your hook is dependent on. Right now, for this hook, for this tutorial, there won't be any kind of dependency added here, but this is why you add your dependency array. If you do not add this, it will keep loading and keep reloading and loading and loading, and it could crash your application. And I've seen that happen during technical interviews. So make sure you add your dependency. So I'm going to import Axios from Axios. All right. I'm also going to clean its linter because right now this thing just annoys me sometimes. So rules, prettier / prettier, make this 0. Okay, so yeah, some of those warnings went away. So anyways, let me go ahead. I'm going to move this over just so I can see what's on our screen. And I'm going to give our debugger a chance again. If this doesn't work this time, it's not a big deal. Okay, there it goes. So our debugger is actually working. So yeah, this is going to be awesome. All right, so now I'm going to use my Axios call. And the function that I'm going to use for Axios is get. You're going to use the get function because you want to get data. So just as I stated earlier, you want to grab this post endpoint. Hey, Luca, I see your comment. I'm going to address it right after I log this data. All right. So you want to grab your endpoint and come back to your application. Paste it in there just like that. And then you want to run then. So once you call that endpoint, what else do you want to do after that? You're going to use your then function. So you're going to say response. Some people use res for shorthand for response, but I'm going to just type it all the way out so that you're familiar. It's more descriptive and you know what's going on. And I'm going to console log response data. Always do this during your interview. And you want to vocalize. You want to say, I'm going to console log response data just so I can see the data properties that are being passed through. So I'm going to say response. We want to console log the response. After I save this, I go to my debugger. When I look at my response, you can see what we have here. We have a few different properties. That is the config property, the data property, the headers request. What we want exists within the data property. So if I go to data, you can see it has a list of everything that's passed back. I'm going to go back to my application. Once I'm in my app, I'm going to say response.data. Always verify, go back to the screen and make sure, okay, let me see how response.data looks. And I'm going to put clear because sometimes these console logs can be console.clear. I want to see if I can zoom in on here. Can't even zoom in. But yeah, as you can see, it shows this is everything that's in that data payload. Once you get to this point, this is like the hardest part during the interview, getting the data from the API to show. Now that we know we have our data coming back from the API, we want to upload, we want to set our data into, we want to place our data within our data variable that we have right here. We do that by using the set data function and passing in response dot data. I'm going to remove these consoles and I'm going to add them to here. Just like that. Instead of console log in response to that data, I'm going to console log data. Go back to my debugger. And as you can see, now we're logging data, and data has an array of 10 values. All right. So I'm going to pause it here and I'm going to answer some questions. So the next step is going to be pagination. So Luca, yeah, React new architecture, Hermes, Turbo, Hermes, Fabric, etc. Honestly, the only thing that I'm familiar with is Hermes. I do know that for Hermes, I'm not familiar with the Turbo and all that stuff, honestly. Hermes allows us to use that Flipper. There's a React Native Flipper component. I mean, debugger. My boss actually my boss handles the React Native updates, as you know. My boss handles the React Native updates, and with the most recent React Native update, I want to say the last 3, Hermes actually has come in as true as familiar, which is why the application was crashing when I tried to debug it. But I mean, as far as I could tell, man, honestly, there's no big difference. I haven't really dug into the architecture using Flipper, or I mean, using Hermes and these other components. But I mean, I focus more on the coding part. I'm not really, this part doesn't bother me at all. It doesn't really change my workflow. Yeah. But I know that there's a lot that you can do with here. I'm actually more comfortable using the React Native debugger, which is why if you were here when I first started, I actually updated the pod file Hermes to false. Because I'm just comfortable using that. It's not necessarily better. Flipper, Hermes and Flipper, it gives you a lot more features that I'm not really too familiar with, that I haven't really used, because I'm very comfortable using my standard React Native debugger and the old architecture. Basically, I'm used to the old ecosystem, so I just code the way I've always been coding. But I'm going to go ahead and just turn this off right here. Do this later. I'm going to reload. Okay, so basically the same thing I just had on my web view debugger. Now I'm getting that in the React Native debugger. Hopefully sorry I couldn't answer a little more than that, Luca. But anyways, I'm going to get to the pagination. So next thing I'm going to actually do, companies may or may not ask you this question. I've only had this happen to me once, where they wanted me to show how to use pagination within a job interview. It's only happened once, and it's really easy. So don't let words like pagination intimidate you. You just need to know what it means. Basically, what you want to do is control the amount of data that is sent to your application. So I'm going to show you what pagination is. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to add a question mark to our endpoint. And I'm going to say page equals 1. I'm going to save this. I'll take a look at my debugger. You can see that it still returns 10 values. So by default, the number, the amount that when you use the page property in your endpoint, the default amount is going to be 10. If I go ahead and I add this to the screen, it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be 10. This endpoint that we're using for this example, it only has 10 properties, but some examples that you get from companies are going to be about 100. And they're going to ask you, how do you control the amount of data that comes to the application? They expect you to know what pagination is. And this is how you do it. Now, right now, I hard coded the number. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get a new property called count, or actually page. I'm going to say set page. State, I'm going to make this page 1 by default. Make sure you use backticks. Get familiar with backticks if you're not. And then you're going to pass in your page variable. Right, so if I take a look at my debugger, you can see that our data is still coming through. Things are working the way that it should be working. Um, the next thing we're going to do, we need a way to update the data in our screen. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in the touchable opacity component. Actually, I'll use pressable because touchable opacity is well, React Native is moving towards pressable. I think I believe they're going to deprecate touchable opacity and also touchable highlight in the future. I read some documentation on the React Native's website talking about it prefers you to use pressable for the foreseeable future. So, anyways, I'm going to create basically a custom button. Within this, I'm going to add my text component and I'm going to say next page. Typically during your interviews, they don't care for you to have to style your components because it's time sensitive, but I'm only going to do that right now. So it's pretty obvious what's going on. Style sheet.create. I'll say button container width 7%. Height, say about 50, and background color red. Also justify content like this. I could have put align self for my text and make that center, but I just like doing it this way. So styles dot button container. Now, if you're not familiar with React Native styling, just leave a comment. So as you can see, now we have our button. So right here for our pressable, I'm going to use our on press property. And for on press, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to say set. Well, I'll make a function actually. Const go to next page. And here, what I'm going to go ahead and do is use my set page function. I'm going to take my previous state value. I'll go previous state plus 1. Okay, and that should return that. And I'm going to pass in this function, go to next page. So just to verify if that's working, I'm going to console log page. And Luca, I'm gonna research the question that you asked me. I'm actually gonna speak to a few other developers I work with and see what all that Hermes actually brings to the table. But anyways, right now page is 1. So when I press this button, you see page updates to 2. Now let me see if there's any kind of change in our data. So I'm going to add another console for data. And data should be empty, I would believe, because there isn't any. There's only 10 properties on here, but we'll see. So right now, page. Okay, so basically data is not updating. Oh, right here. So I'm going to add this page property to our dependency. So every time the page updates, we're going to call this import again and get our new data. So now let me see. And I guess it's not updating because right now there's only, well, let me see. Oh, it is. As you can see, the ID is 917, 1615. And if I update it again, yes, you can see it updates to 907, 906. This is pagination. This is how you control the amount of data that's sent on the screen. That's basically what they're going to ask you to do. They're going to ask you how do you control the amount of data that comes back to the app? How do you implement pagination? Now, there's more that I could do here. I can actually add, as a person scrolls down, I can actually have the data update that way as well. once we meet the end of our screen, I can have a create a function that calls the endpoint and passes in that new data. But I promise you, for your interview, they're not going to ask you to do anything like that. So, anyways, now that we know that we have our data showing on the screen, the next thing to do is actually to get the data on the screen. What I want you to do, they don't care if you Google anything. What you want to tell them is, okay, so now I'm going to use the React Native flat list to get my data on my screen. I want you to go ahead and just Google flat list React Native. And don't try to do anything yourself. Just go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to copy this. And they're fine with that. They don't care. The developers, I've interviewed developers. No developer expects you to know everything off the top of your head. They just want to get an idea of what your workflow is. Your goal is just to be relaxed during your interview. Okay, so I'm going to update the data property, our data property. This render item. Make sure you add your braces and then curly braces. And within that, the render item always expects you to use the item property. Now from here, you don't have to do anything too fancy. They don't expect you to do anything crazy. They just wanted you to get the data on the screen. Now we take a look at our payload. Make sure I bring in the flat list. Also, I saw that we just left another comment. Let me take a look at that. Yeah, React. Hey, Luke, I'll answer your next question right after I get this data to show on the screen. All right, so next thing, what is this error? Flat list. That's still not, oh, okay, flat list. Okay, cool. So if I take a look at the debugger, you can see that we have a few different properties coming through. We have our body and our title. There's no reason we can't get both. I think I'll go ahead and just style this just to make it look somewhat good. So I'm gonna go ahead and just create a card component. So width, 100%. If you guys are so new that you don't understand React Native styling, let me know. I'll go ahead and just create a video covering styling for React Native. I forget. I mean, I haven't been a beginner in so many years. I forget how complex styling can be. I know on the web it can be it can suck too on the web. So padding, padding 20. I think this is good enough. I can put like a border radius 10, a border width 1, border color blue, and margin bottom. They don't really expect you to style during your interviews at all. I'm only styling right now just for this tutorial, and I want it to be clear what's going on. So card, take this. Okay, and it expects the card to have, what is it, a title and a body. So I'll go ahead and just say title, font size 20, font weight bold, and for our body, I'll go ahead and say font size is going to be 16, and font weight is going to be 300. So styles, title, and next is going to be that body. Okay, so item dot title. I'm going to take a break right after this and answer some questions in item dot body. Okay, cool. And let me make sure. Go ahead and add like a margin bottom 5. Oh, okay. I think that this is good enough. So yeah, as you can see, now we have all of our data on the screen, and you can see we have the title and the description. So stop. I'm going to go ahead. Okay, so question from Luca. Duran, I also like to know how you advance your knowledge in React Native. Should I read documentation or just practice? The way you're going to advance your knowledge in React Native is by building things, man. I'm trying to give you my my experience with doing this. When I first started learning React Native years ago, the first thing I actually did, and I still have some of those books on these bookshelves if you can see it, but first thing I did is I bought books. So the books were good because it got me familiar with React Native's components. It got me familiar with just knowing how to call data, knowing how to use navigation, things like that. Just the basic things for React Native. After that, after the books and also buying courses, the reason I say that I'm not sure. Look, let me know if you. Oh, look, let me know if you work as a professional engineer. So after I did everything I could do on my own, building projects, building applications that already existed. I had no idea when I first started software engineering. When I first started React Native was the first time I actually even started my software engineering journey. So I had no idea how to build my own database and then how to get the data from my database to show on my React Native application. And so from there, because I was curious in that way, I learned about APIs. I learned how to create my own API. And then I got familiar with the front end and the back end. Now, the next step, the biggest step for me, the reason I say when you want to work as a React Native developer, because you're going to work with engineers that have more experience than you. They worked for major companies. Me, for example, when I worked for General Motors, that was the first time I worked with a company that had over 100 plus engineers. So we had engineers in Michigan. We had engineers in Michigan. We had engineers in Texas, and we also had engineers on the East Coast. Sorry if my voice is messed up. Like I said, I'm sick. I have a cold. But anyways, that was the first time I was able to see a React Native application built on a high level. So from there, I got really familiar with. I want to say I got familiar with how. I mean, how am I saying? I got familiar with how to architect the application at a high level. Um, Working for General Motors, it was more OOP. So because it was more OOP, I got an idea how you actually separate your components and how you were supposed to basically just architect, how you were supposed to strongly type a React Native application to get things up and working. So I would think once you go from React Native, I would start building TypeScript, learning how to use TypeScript and courses. I mean, I'm not sure, look at how long you've been here, but I have a website called GeekMODE.tech. And there within my membership for a month, for a monthly fee, you get it goes through the React Native process. It teaches you the React Native components, and then from there, it teaches you how to build an application using the React Native components. It teaches you state management. It also teaches you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So yeah, on my website, for a monthly membership, the reason I set it up this way is because I'm thinking as if somebody has never did React Native before in their life. So first it teaches you how to use React Native. It teaches you the basic React Native components. And then from there, it teaches you how to use those components to build a industry level application. From there, it teaches you state management in detail. And then this is the most, honestly, for me personally, I think that this is the best course available in the membership because it teaches you how to not only build a React Native application, it teaches you how to build a database using Mongo, and also teaches you how to build an API. And TypeScript, just because a lot of companies nowadays, they expect you to know React Native and TypeScript. And then also, guys, like I said, if you guys are looking for positions right now, make sure you add me on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, you can get an idea of what my experience is. and get more familiar with who I am, and you can see my credentials. But then also, I get people who come to me about React Native positions all the time. So if you guys can come to me, if you guys are serious about React Native and you're learning it and you're communicating with me, I can definitely refer you to a recruiter. But Luca, what I would say, man, you're always going to be limited on some level. You can learn React Native really good by buying books, by buying courses, building projects that exist, like building your own Instagram, building your own Facebook, learning how to build a database, probably creating a chat application. Because when you build these apps, you're going to ask yourself questions. And because you're curious, you're going to do your own research and find out how to actually implement those features. But it's not until you actually work as a professional software developer where you really start to understand the ins and outs of mobile development. For me personally, the thing that I'm working on right now is because I feel like I'm an expert in React Native. I'm the lead React Native developer for the company that I work for. So the next step for me is actually building mobile applications using Java and using Kotlin, and then mobile applications using Swift, because it's easy to develop. You really don't know if you're a developer until you're not truly a software developer until you have like strong debugging skills. I could debug an application easily with React Native, but I can't debug an application easily with using Xcode and Swift, or using Kotlin and using Android Studio. So the next step after learning React Native is get familiar with the Android ecosystem and the iOS ecosystem. Hopefully that answers your question. I'll go. I hate being sick. I wonder if you can use any CSS library. You actually can. You can, man. There's a let me see. I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna pause my remove my video real fast, and I'm gonna look at a just give me 2 minutes, because a company that I'm working for, there's a I do like some side work. There's a company, Styled Components. Let me see. Yarn. I'm gonna go ahead. I think that this is the name of the dependency you're thinking of. Well, let me see. React Native Styled Components. I think this is the dependency. Yes, it is. Luca, this is the dependency. Now, there's a dependency called Style Components, and Style Components, it allows you to use CSS with your React Native applications. I would dig into this and get familiar with it. I've used it before. It's really good. The only thing is that if you're not working as a professional developer, companies are going to expect you to know how to use styling without using a third-party library. But if you're curious about that, get familiar with Style Components. I'm going to post a link to that in the chat for you. Okay, so next question. Okay, sorry for bombarding with questions. Luca, check out that check out the link to Style Components. You can use that in your React Native applications. I've used them before. I work as a junior React Native developer trying to become a senior React Native developer. Oh man, I think how long have you worked for the company you're working for? Because sometimes as a junior, companies put like this, you can get stagnant. You can get stuck working for a company because they're not challenging you and you're just doing the day in and day out. I would say once you're comfortable at the position you're at right now, I would say start looking for senior level React Native positions. Apply for those positions. I mean, I'm sure if you're working as a developer, I'm sure you have like a LinkedIn. I will start applying for senior positions and then also entertain recruiters, because the only way you're really going to advance is by finding a new position. Companies aren't typically, regardless if you're a junior or a senior, everybody's doing the same work. It's just the title. So if you want to get more familiar and have like I would look for, this is what I would do. I would look for a company that is converting their application from native, from like an pure iOS application into a React Native application. The company I work for, that's what they were doing. And because I had a strong React Native background, I got the opportunity to take an application that already had over 1 million users and then actually build out the architecture, the ecosystem, build out basically the whole React Native system from the ground up. So I think that would be my next step. Looking for a company that's trying to convert their application into React Native, or the opportunity to build an application from scratch, because that'll help you it help you get more familiar with mobile architecture in general and build and develop stronger mobile skills. Hey man, hey, no, thank you for asking questions, man. So I'm going to go to the next part. So I already covered flat list. And the next thing I'm going to cover is passing props. This is the last thing for this tutorial. Passing props, the only way you can do that is using React navigation. So I'm going to go ahead and show my screen. I'll typically take a look at the data that comes back from the screen. Sometimes it has like an ID. Right now we're passing back. If I take a look at the endpoint, we're getting post. So we're getting all the posts. But sometimes a company, what they'll do, sometimes what a company will do is they will they'll tell you to use the ID, which is right here. They'll tell you to take this ID and pass this ID to a new screen, and then use that ID to call another API. We'll call another endpoint. In this example, we're not going to do that. We're just going to pass the entire payload. But some companies, they do that because they want to see if you can actually, they don't return all the data on the first screen like this one. Like one company, they'll say, okay, say, for example, whatever this is, say you want to get more information on title. So you'll press this card and it'll redirect you to the screen, and it will show you more data that is shown on this screen. This endpoint doesn't really display that, but that's typically, sometimes they'll ask you that. But anyways, let's add React navigation to our application. What in the world is going on? See, I'm going to go through this process. Copy this. I'm going to close my Metro bundler. Okay. I can skip this because we're not using Expo. I strongly advise you not to use Expo just because it's more of like, it's more for beginners. Expo, when you're deploying your application, the application size is a lot bigger because they Expo installs all these unneeded packages into your project that basically things that you don't need. And also Expo has its own dependencies that you could become familiar and comfortable with that you'll never use within the real world. So I'll say just start using the React Native CLI. So I'm going to get screens, add this in, and then next. Well, before I do that, I want to do stack navigation. Well, hold on, let me get the pod install. So say I need to go into my iOS directory, pod install. Okay, cool. And the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add stack navigation. Stack navigation, basically when you click on something, it opens a new screen. Okay. And force quit. All right. Because I rebuilt my my pods, Xcode was spazzing out. All right, cool. Now just get our application up and running again. And start, reset, cache. Okay. Hopefully this goes by pretty fast. These M1 chips, it better it better do its thing. Oh yeah, let me see React navigation. The example says when to show. Okay, so while this is loading, I'm going to go ahead and create a few more screens. So I'm going to say, I'm going to run through this real fast. So I'm going to create a file called navigation. Navigation.js. And I'm going to just copy everything that we have here. And I'm going to create a new file called home screen.js, and then another file called details screen.js. My home screen, I'm going to copy everything I have here, and I'm going to paste this in here for a home screen, update the component from app to home. We'll say home screen. That's all. Then for detail screen, I'm just going to create a component called details screen, just like that. Now within my navigation, I'm going to import my home screen, and then import details screen. And here, this, and paste in detail screen, details. All right, so export default app navigation. Okay, cool. I'm gonna go back to my app component, remove everything I have here, create an app component, import app navigation, paste this in just like that, app navigation. Okay, cool. So I did that fast, but everything's looking the way that it should look. Now, when I click here, right now, nothing is happening because we haven't set this functionality. So I'm going to go to my home screen. And I'm going to create a new function called go to detail screen. Go to details screen. So I'm going to import, say, navigation. What is it? Use navigation, React navigation. I'm going to create a function. I'm going to destructure it, set this equal to all over the place. Set this equal to use navigation. And it has use navigation has a navigate function. I'm going to use that. And I'm going to say, let me go ahead and take a look at the documentation for navigate. Actually, navigate. So you can see right here, it's calling the detail screen. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy what we have here. Let me go back to my navigation. So right now we have a detail screen. Whatever I name this, whatever name I give this, I'm going to have to reference that name within our navigate function. So right now, for whatever reason, the app is not recognizing this navigate function. Yeah, it's not recognizing it. Okay. Details. I'm not sure why it's not recognizing this function right now. It's being hard headed. So I'm gonna go ahead and see what happens when I do this. It's not recognizing this navigate function. What is going on? I know I've seen something like this before. Let's say TypeScript navigation. This is out of scope for this tutorial, but TypeScript navigation, it should do something like that. Navigate. Okay, so this is what I was thinking. Maybe it's looking for something like this. For whatever reason, it's not recognizing this navigate function. If I can't get this to work, I'm going to just cut it short. But for whatever reason, it recognizes it here, and it's not recognizing it once I once I call details. Unexpected token details. All right, when this type of stuff happens, it's going to go to the properties of use, navigation context. This is a little bit advanced. I'm looking at the properties of this function. Key. So is that what it's looking for? Hey, yeah, sorry about that, guys. I'm not sure why this navigate function does not want to work right now. This is the way that you're supposed to use it. If you take a look at the navigation. Navigate. There's another way to use this. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna look at the props. This is kind of old school, but I may have to do it this way. Props. I'll debug this. Okay, so props has a navigation property. This is the old school way. This isn't the way you want to do it. But hey, I'm not giving a chance. I'm not giving no other choice right now. So navigation dot navigate. Yep, here it goes right here. And details. Okay, so I'm gonna have to do it this way. Props navigate. Okay, so it's not recognizing it within this. Ah, stupid. Okay. Oh my goodness. All right. So basically, I did not create a function. So, anyways, in that function, details go to, I'm going to pass in some I want to say properties or yeah, properties. That went way too long. I'm going to remove this and add the way that we should have did it. So I'm going to say const equals use navigation navigate. And somebody probably left a comment of that earlier, anyways. Navigate like this. Is this still not trying to let me do this? Okay, forget it. I'll do it the props way. Anyways, that's what you want to do. And you want to pass in certain parameters, I want to say screen parameters. So I'll say params instead of props. Params. Passing your params right here. Okay. And I'm going to update our flat list to be pressable rather than just view. On press, and I'll pass in say go to next screen. And then from there, I'll go ahead and pass in my item. Yes. Now, what is pressable doing? I don't even know why this is giving me this warning now either. But anyways, that's what you want to do. You see I'm going to the next screen. I'm passing my properties. If I go into my detail screen now, go to my details component. This has properties. I'm going to go ahead and console log properties here. Here goes my props. You can see we have route.params. So I'm going to grab my props.route.params. As you can see within our params, we're passing back our title, our body, and our ID. So if I go ahead and I just say props dot, well, let me make two variables. I'll say title is equal to, if props dot params, all this stuff is true. This is true. I want to return title. Else I want to be an empty string. could do the same thing for my body. So yeah, I'm not going to style this. Basically, this is how you pass your data from one screen to the next screen. Um, this is what companies basically want to see when you have your job interview. They want you to get data to show on the screen. They want you to understand. They want you to understand what pagination is, and they also want you to pass data from one screen to the next screen. Sorry that that navigation went as it was more difficult than it should have been. Basically, my negligence. I forgot to make our variable a function. I mean, yeah, make our variable a function, and that's why I was getting that warning. I'm still not sure why the hook use navigate wasn't working properly, but I promise you it works usually on at least when I'm at work, it works for me. I'm going to take a look at the comments. If we don't have any more questions, I'm just going to continue. All right, doesn't look like there's any more comments. Luca, thank you for your input. I'm going to go ahead and do more research on Hermes and find out everything that it has to offer. I know that my boss and a few developers, we were digging into it. But honestly, man, you work as a developer. When you're working, you have so many different bugs you need to fix, features, tickets that need to get done, and things get lost. But I promise you, I'll go ahead and I'll ask around. I'll try to figure out a little bit more. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. If you're interested in learning React Native, I strongly advise you to check out GeekMODE School of React Native and also add me on LinkedIn. If you have any questions related to React Native or you're looking to get hired as a React Native developer, just reach out to me and I'm willing, open and willing to help. Anyways, thank you for being here. Peace.